Welcome to the first episode of Season 5 of the Grace Lace Podcast. I'm Ruth Jo Simons, and my co-host Eve Stipes and I are so excited to be back with you. We took a slightly longer than expected break, which you'll actually hear more about this season. So we're so grateful you're joining us today. If you're like us, it feels like there's always more work to do, more activities to plan, and more people to see, but there's not always more time, resources, or capacity to do it all. Whether we like it or not, we each only have 24 hours each day. And some of those hours include much needed and absolutely necessary sleep. So, how do we embrace the limitations we've been given? I'm so glad you asked. Grab a cup of coffee and join us for today's conversation.
Okay, I am so excited about this season. And by excited, I mean a little terrified because it feels really timely for the things that we're both like in real time currently processing in our lives. Isn't it just like the Lord to give us these really like practical current experiences to talk about? Sometimes I wish he wouldn't, but here we are. So, the first question I think we have to talk about as we jump into this season is, what do we even mean by limitations or capacity? Like, where do they come from? What does that even mean? Ruth, what does it mean
Right.
to
I
you?
mean, well, when you say those two words, I immediately feel like this tension, like, oh, I wish I could do it all. I wish I didn't have limitations. I wish I didn't struggle with capacity.
Right.
Oh my goodness. I mean, I think the interesting thing is God actually orders our lives. Like he actually defines our days with time for sleep,
Hmm.
time for eating. There's a rhythm for our whole day, but sometimes, I don't know about you, but I think I act like I am God myself and I'm a superhero and I can somehow skip meals and
Right.
not move my body, not sleep. Somehow I can just eke out a little bit more work, or I can hustle a little bit harder, or I can just get up real early, stay up real late. And somehow I am delusional and I think that I can just push past my limitations and create the life I've always wanted by making myself Lord and God over my time and my life. And that's just not the way God designed it.
Yeah, it's funny because I do think often we see limitations as a barrier for us to push past. Like, oh, I can overcome that. Like, I'll just keep going. I can fit it in. As opposed to seeing like that limitation is actually a gift from God. He has given us a boundary and it's not something for us to just blow past. It's actually meant to remind us that we're human and not
Yeah.
God. And
Yep.
they can be really good for us. We just push against them so frequently.
Well, I think about how there were so many seasons of my life as a mama, because I mean, if you're new to the podcast, I have 6 boys and the oldest is 21 and the youngest is about to turn 10. And so for a good 11 years of my life, I was constantly nursing, changing diapers, adding more to our family. And I I think I struggled with the limitations that season brought.
Hmm.
And it took a little while for me to understand that those limitations were for my good. They were actually refining. They were limitations that helped me really press into the actual purposes that God had for me right then in the midst of my
Yeah.
everyday life. It's just that those limitations meant that I couldn't always do everything I wanted to do, right? That wasn't the season
Yeah.
that I launched a business. That wasn't a
Yeah.
season that I could do a lot of podcasting. That wasn't a season that I could even write a book. And so those seasons had limitations that were meant ultimately for me to grow and
Mm.
become, and the very things that I feel like my readers get to read from my books right now are from a season and many seasons of limitations. Lots and lots of
Yeah.
limitations that I would have wanted to not have during that season.
Yeah, and I think that's another interesting point, right? Like seasons make a difference. Like the limitations that you face right now may not be the same things that you'll face down the road. So things that cause limitations or a different capacity could be our seasons of life. What you can do and what you can fit into your schedule as a single person is a lot different than even what you can fit in if you're dating somebody really seriously. Definitely
Right.
different than if you are married or have kids that you're kind of managing schedules for. What you can do when you're in school, like you're studying as a full time student, versus what you can do when you're working a job, those are different types of seasons. You know, your health and different seasons may cause a limitation. If you're caring for an aging parent, what you can say yes to or what you can
For
fit
sure.
into your life is going to be really different.
I think the question about limitations and capacity really brings about a, a self-assessment, just a real awareness of am I am I believing that my life needs to be completely full and
Mm,
tapped out and almost like bursting at the seams in order to have value? Or am
yeah.
I willing to say, God gives me value in the very life that I'm leading when I'm faithful to do the things that He's already given me to do? I don't need to keep adding more and saying yes to more and more and more in order to feel fulfilled or that
Hmm.
other people like us or that
Or for
we
it to be
are meeting
good.
expectation, right? Like,
Yeah.
so I think it's just one of those things, at least in my life, this topic really forces me to consider where I'm going to find satisfaction, where I'm
Hmm.
going for joy. W- I mean, FOMO is real, right? A lot
Yeah.
the flip side to limitations and capacity is that sometimes we're going to feel FOMO,
Yep.
fear of missing out. Sometimes we're going to miss things that are really good and that we would like to do. Um, Eve, I have to tell you, by the time this airs, I think my dear friends, really, really good friends who are part of the Faithful Project
Yeah.
in Nashville. If you're listening and you haven't listened to the Faithful Project, I was so honored to be able to write a devotional for the devotional part of the project, but also write music and record with good friends like Ellie Holcomb and Amy Grant and Sandra McCracken and so many more, and my author friends. And one of my favorite songs I got to write was um, a song called Rise Up. That's about Esther. And so look it up on Spotify or wherever you listen to music. But by the time this podcast airs, those friends will be in
Yeah.
Canada on the property of my dear, like literally one of my dearest friends, one of my closest friends, Ann Voskamp. They're going to be on her property recording album 2 at her stone church that she and her family
So pretty.
remodeled
I know.
or renovated. Can I just tell you how much FOMO I'm going to feel and how sad it will feel to me that I did not get to go on this amazing road trip? Even if I flew in, I just didn't have the capacity to do it.
Hmm.
My schedule was tight and full. I knew that if I added in one more trip in between bookends of other trips and other obligations, that I would essentially, um,
Feel crazy.
well, yes, let's just say that first, that I would feel crazy, but also I know what my heart needs at home. I know what I need with my
Yeah.
kids. I know what I need with Troy. I know how I need to rest. And just because I can doesn't mean I should. And that's a
Hmm.
phrase that I used so long ago in a different season of life, but it still applies now that just because I can do something, just because and you're the one who manages my calendar or my schedule. But
Yep.
just because there are 3 days or 2 days where we could maybe fly me into Canada and fly me out doesn't mean that it's the wise thing to do. And so I had to really work through the question of capacity and limitation and
Yeah.
just kind of surrender that I'm not God and I'm not Lord of my life and I'm not capable of being everything for everybody at all times. And that
Yeah.
I can't say yes to all the things that I want to do if I am to say yes to really important things in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can think of times in the past where I have not embraced limitations well, and it has really come back to bite me. Like my freshman year of college, I went away to school and I had a pretty heavy course load. I was believe it or not, a biology major with a
Still
chemistry
blows me
minor.
away.
I know. And was pushing really hard. And it's like, you're on your own for the first time. And so it's like, go to all the things, with all the people, and meet new friends and go to every mixer. And I'm an introvert by heart and need some downtime. And I just allowed myself none. And there was a point, I think it was maybe January or February, that I remember calling my mom one day just in tears. And I was like, I can't do it anymore. Like, I can't. I have to stop and I don't know what to do. And I don't know how to like not do the
Mm,
things I've committed to. And she was like, why don't you just come home? And it was a 6 hour drive. And I like got in my car that afternoon and drove home and just stayed there for like 3 days. And my mom was like, she says to me all the time, even now, what you just said, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
mm.
And having to like work through like, okay, I can't just have an emotional breakdown. Like when I don't listen to my body, to the limitations God has given me, it's not good. It always ends poorly every single time.
And I'm not sure that you have the same exact issue in college of striving as I did, but you could read that book When Striving Ceased
Yeah.
because I kind of was in the same boat, like kind of
Yeah.
went through the same thing. I was a biology major. I was struggling with some
Mhm.
of those very things. And so that's why we love each other so much, right?
It
We
is.
we we get it. We get each other. No. That's such a good reminder and such a good story that I really hope someone who's listening that that's really for somebody
Hmm.
tuning in right now,
Yeah.
that testimony of how you just can't keep pushing and just because you can and just because you want to prove that you can be this amazing student and that you
Yep.
can do it all doesn't mean that that is a wise and healthy thing. So I guess the question ultimately is, how do we embrace our limitations then? Like, what is it that causes us to, I mean, one way is to literally hit the wall physically,
Right.
hit the wall emotionally. I mean, when you have a mental, or emotional crash and you're just in a puddle of tears, that's a good warning sign, right?
Yeah. Like,
Sometimes
hey,
when
pay
you're,
attention.
yeah, and sometimes when your body shuts down, or let's not, let's, I mean, you and me, let's commit to not waiting till that happens.
Right.
And I'm hoping our listeners here also agree that like we don't need to push it until our body or our heart or our mind is like, stop.
Right.
We can start being wise even now to embrace our limitations. So,
Yeah, so I think maybe the first like step, if we're going to talk about like action steps, is acknowledging that we have limitations.
yeah,
Acknowledging
for
we are
sure.
not superheroes, we are not God. Like we have limitations in what we can see, what we can know, how much time we have, um, how many resources we have. Like all of those things are limited. So just saying like that is a fact, and I'm going to operate within those bounds is a good first
Yeah.
step.
And I think that that's really about taking inventory and making sure that you are
Yeah,
praising the Lord for what he's already given you, taking into account what he's already given you to do, the people he's already put in your life. I think a lot about how I feel like maybe I've shared this in a different episode, but I think about the times in which it's really easy to be like, oh, well, I really wish that I could be friends with so and so and so and so and so and so, when
right.
really I'm forgetting that God's already put people right in front of me. And maybe it's not the person that I would have handpicked out of the blue to say, I want that person to be my friend. But God, in his sovereignty, has chosen to put people in our lives, tasks for us to do, even the home and the family that I come home to every day. That's my first area of priority and
Yeah.
stewardship, right? And so I think for me, because it's not like we're going to open our Bibles and say, oh, in this exact address in the scriptures, we're going to see exactly what God tells us in terms of assessing our capacity and limitations.
Yeah.
But we will see that God, in his sovereignty, God who orchestrates all things, is not careless about the circumstances of our lives. And
Yeah.
he's not randomly assigning us the very callings and the tasks we've been given. So when we understand that about God, we can look at our lives and say, okay, if that is true about him, then today matters and what I
Mhm.
do today matters. And I don't need to skip what is right in front of me and go chase a whole bunch of other stuff.
Yeah.
And so I have to take inventory of what he's already doing. That kind of stewardship, and we talk a lot about stewardship on the Graceless podcast,
Yep.
but that kind of stewardship, and acknowledging that we've been given much to do much with, that actually is the beginning of assessing how to orchestrate our lives in a way that honors the Lord with our capacity and our limitations, right?
Yeah, and if we think about it in those terms, it's like our capacity becomes like the filter that we ask what God is doing, right?
Ah,
Like
so good.
we can
Yes.
see, yeah, like you've limited my capacity, so that means that what's in front of me is all I got. Or
Yes.
that I can't say yes to this or I can't say yes to this. So capacity and what we're actually able physically, mentally, emotionally to do is part of how God is directing our steps. And
It
we have to be humble to like accept that instead of pushing against it.
it's kind of like reverse engineering, right? I mean, instead of
Yeah.
saying, what's God's will for my life? What am I supposed to do with my life? It's almost like we start with, what can I not do? Like what
Yeah.
I don't have the capacity to go and be overseas digging wells right now. Like I can't
Hmm.
do that with my life. I can't start a nonprofit right now, or I can't go volunteer at my child's school every day. I mean, I'm just throwing out some different ideas. Or if
Yeah.
you're caring for an aging parent, you can't meet somebody for lunch every day of the
Mhm.
week. So when you look at, okay, I have limitations to my capacity, so I cannot do that, then it changes the way you think about, well, what has God actually given me to do? And I love that as a filter, Eve. That's a really good point.
Yeah, and I think about too, I have a couple of close friends who wrestle with chronic illness. So just how that plays a role in their lives and limiting their capacity and having to make really intentional choices about what they're going to
Hmm.
spend their energy on or their time. And I've heard them say like, yeah, it's a gift from the Lord that has forced me to slow down, like has
Yeah.
made me stop. There's a really great quote from John Mark Comer in his book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry.
Mm,
And he says, one of the key tasks of our apprenticeship to Jesus is living into both our potential and our limitations. And I was like, oh man, yeah, like that is
that's good. Yeah.
both boundaries. It's like the gutters for your bowling ball, right? Like
Yeah.
one side and the other.
Don't you think it'd be so freeing if, as believers, as sisters who walk, with one another in community, if we just started normalizing this conversation about capacity and
Yeah.
limitations, that we didn't go around acting as if it's limitless and that we are capable of so much more than is actually real. I think about how, every chance I get, when people say, Ruth, how do you do it all? How do you
Yep.
write books and have a beautiful home and raise children and have home cooked meals? I always literally stop them and say, okay, but let's talk about how it really is. Do I actually do it all? No, I
Right.
really don't. And as we speak, even as we're recording this podcast, I'm sitting in a room that really needs not just a little tidying up, like it needs an overhaul. And so the reality is, when you say yes to something, and in this moment, I'm saying yes to podcasting,
Hmm.
I want to get this message out. We're having an important conversation here, and I'm saying no to something else. I'm saying
Hmm.
no to picking up all the stuff that's on the floor at the moment. But later on, I'm going to make a choice to make that the priority. And so there's
Yeah.
constant limitations in everything. And we would do well to not pretend that we can do it
Hmm.
all. And we would do well to not hide our limitations from one another.
Yeah, and to not apologize for them,
Hmm.
like
Yeah,
not to call them bad, but to say like, "Hey, this is the choice that needs to happen and this is what's best for me, for my family, for whatever season I'm in." And for us to like cheer each other on like, "Yes, like you're doing it. You're saying no, you're doing the good thing, you're embracing that limitation."
I love
So,
that.
good job for not picking up your room before we started recording. I'm proud of you. Okay, so one thing that if you've listened to the podcast before, you know that we end every episode with a couple of important questions. We always kind of want to distill our message down to, well, what is the gospel truth that's underlying this conversation and why does it matter? And then what's one small thing, one small step that we can take to apply what we've been talking about?
Hmm.
Because we believe that it doesn't necessarily require a huge step, a huge change, but little steps add up over time to really change the trajectory of where we're headed. So,
Yep. So the
gospel
gospel truth
truth.
here, the
Yeah.
gospel truth we've already talked about is that God is the author of order in our lives,
Mm,
and God made us so that are limited. That sleep is an acknowledgement that God is
yeah.
God and we're not, right? And that ultimately we were created with limitations and a lack of, we're limited in our capacity, and we have limitations, so that we can point to a limitless God and
Yeah.
show that we are the created, not the creator, and that we could lean on him and rely on him, and that we would ultimately, if we're talking about the gospel, that we are those who need saving, that we
Yep.
can't save ourselves by just packing in our schedules. We can't
Absolutely.
save ourselves by doing more and being so amazing. That in itself will not save us at all.
Yeah. And that really does matter for the day to day.
Hmm.
It really does matter for how we communicate who we are and who God is to a watching world. So, okay.
Well,
One
what's
small
one small
thing.
thing then? I'm going to make you go.
Okay. Oh man. I feel like there's a lot of one small things that I could do
Hmm.
for this. Like I said, this whole season feels very personal to me right
Hmm.
now and very in the moment. So, I think I can't remember if we've talked about this before in another episode, but if we have, I'm like recommitting. Like, I have got to go to bed at a reasonable time. It is a serious issue of
Hmm.
capacity for me, and I just need to trust the Lord. Like, it will be okay if I don't do the laundry tonight, or it will be
Hmm.
okay if this task doesn't get checked off.
Hmm.
I'm going to rest because I know that's what I need. That's how God has made my body. So I'm committing to a 9:30 done with everything drop dead zone. Like, it's okay. I will start getting
Yeah.
ready for bed. I will start decompressing. I will be done with whatever the tasks of the day are at 9:30. So feel free to text me at your 7:30
Oh
and
my
say,
goodness.
"Are you done?"
For real, right? There, that's a small thing that's really a big thing,
Yeah,
that it makes such a big impact if we would just
do it.
prioritize something so small as to worship through rest, worship
Mhm.
through sleep, worship through saying, God, you've got this. I don't need to
Yeah.
hold it all together. I think for me, a small thing, which you would think that I'm doing this already. I feel like it's kind of mental that I have this going, but I feel like I want to make it a little bit more um, like on paper. But I do really think that I need to take inventory of what God's already given me.
Mm.
Um, there's there are lots of situations that I can't share here on this podcast episode, but whether it's in business or in my family or in my personal career or in my marriage, there are so many things that I wish
Right.
could just be a little bit better or
Mhm.
a little different. Or I wish I could just add in all these other things so that I could get the results that I want. And I can think of so many different ways in which right now I'm like, God, if you could just pile it on in this way, if I could just do A, B, and C and make everything better,
Yeah.
my life would be just,
Awesome.
I get where I want to go.
Yeah.
But I do feel like in this conversation about limitations and capacity, I really need to physically see with my own eyes what God's already given me,
Mm.
and once again make it a regular practice, look at how I can steward what I already have versus thinking that it's what I don't have that I need to be chasing after.
That's good. Really hard,
Very hard. Yeah.
but really good. Really helpful practice for sure. Well, friends, we hope today's conversation whets your appetite for the rest of this season. We're going to be talking through 5 principles. They're not all inclusive for sure. We're not going to cover every aspect of limitations or capacity, but 5 principles to help us intentionally embrace the limitations that God's put in our lives as we make decisions about how we spend our time and our resources and how we leverage and steward our overall capacity. So, if you found today's episode helpful, we'd be so honored if you leave a review on whatever platform you're listening on, or send the episode to a friend. Your reviews and sharing really do help other people find us. Thank you so much for joining us today.